Afraid you get me now. Now, I know some of you weren't here last week, you had other things, but this is actually, we do series here. We do a whole different series on different subjects, and we're doing a series at the moment on the subject of creating space. Thinking the whole idea that, one of the most important things we can do is create space for each other, create space for people. And that's what the series has been about. And this is the second week. And just on the chairs in front of you, if you want to catch up on listen to the other one last week, then if you look at the blue little chitty in front of you, it'll show you how to listen to past ones. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, and you can watch these services live streamed every week, people who are watching right now, and you can just link in wherever you live, and if you're interested, watch the services. So this is the second in the series that I'm doing on the subject of creating space. And I think that's one thing that John did. He created the space for many of us to touch something special in our lives, to love both each other and also nature in a new way. And last week in the service, I looked at the idea that the concept of space, when we think about space, it includes not only shape, volume, and time, but also in the idea of space, there is a generative and creative quality about it that goes further than the normal concept of space just being a void. Nature abhors a vacuum, and space, all space, creates the potential for something to happen. The idea of the potentiality in space. And it's the nothing space that contains the possibility of something not yet there. Do come in and have a seat, no problem at all. There's some chairs over there, and do come sit down. And if we're looking at creating space for those around us, we have to get out the way to allow that potential to come through us. Vicky, do you want just, Catherine, do you want to show them in and just show them where to sit? That'd be great. Just bring them in. That's great. So if we're looking at the idea of creating space for those around us, we have to get out of the way to allow that potential to come through us. And, I sense that's how John wrote songs. He got out the way and let the songs come through him. Now, for those of you that didn't know, today is the feast of St. Francis. And we've got a little icon of St. Francis here as part of it. And it's the day that we have our animal blessing. So if any of you got your cats or dogs in the car by any chance, afterwards at 11 o'clock, outside you probably saw we're going to have a blessing of animals. That's at 11 o'clock. And there's a special prayer that St. Francis is supposed to have written. And Mimi actually gave it to me last week. And it describes the idea of surrender to allow that divine creativity to come through. I think it's particularly apt when we're talking about creating space. It allows the idea of surrender. And this is the prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring love. Where there is offense, let me bring pardon. Where there is discord, let me bring union. Where there is error, let me bring truth. Where there is doubt, let me bring faith. Where there is despair, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, let me bring your light. Where there is sadness, let me bring your joy. Each of those, creating a space for those things to happen. O Lord, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console. To be understood, not to seek so much to be understood as to understand, not to seek so much to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that one receives, and in self-forgetting that one finds. It is in forgiving that we are forgiven, and it is in dying that we awake to eternal life. I think that's quite John Denver. That is a prayer for the creation of a space to allow the latent creative potential within us to be realized by the action of the Spirit. And with this surrender, if we're able just to let go of our own personal desires and things that we want, When we do that, we open up a portal that allows a latent creativity, the essence of life within us, to come through us. You call it the Christ, whatever you like to call it. This is the alchemy that allows us to turn the dross and humdrum aspects of our lives into the gold of divine creativity. We add nothing, but we surrender. And through doing this, we become that vehicle of the divine. That's the way the world works, really. Last week, Brennan was here and asked how we know when to respond. How do we know when to do something, when not to respond? And he quoted a famous dialogue from the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture, where the prince Arjuna questions the need for battle to Krishna. And he responds, and this is, when do we do something? If we're creating a space, when do we get out the way and when do we not get out the way? And he says, you have a right to your actions, but never to your actions' fruits. Act for action's sake and do not be attached to inaction. This is how actions were done by the ancient seekers of freedom. Follow their example. Act and surrendering the fruits of action. So as well as getting out of the way, what we do, we don't just do nothing. We don't just sit in our room and do nothing. We have to act. But what we have to give up, what we have to surrender as well, is our desire to control the results of our actions. That's the spiritual thing. We act out of love, and then we allow whatever comes through to come through. Our role is to surrender first, and then all our actions are in service to the divine. We surrender by not being attached to the fruits of our actions. Just as a songwriter can put out a song, but not control the effect that it has on the listener. I was talking last week about Mimi, and she talked about developing an intuitive response. An intuitive response. And an intuitive response is actually an artistic term. An intuitive response is a first response to music or artworks that is intuitive, personal, and often purely emotional. This response is based on personal experience, feelings, associations, and creative imaginations. Our initial response to John's songs, when we first heard them, that's the intuitive response. And in the area of spirituality, which, given we're in this building and this is Sunday and it's at 9:30, so we are actually supposed to be talking about this sort of stuff, not just John. In the idea of spirituality, our intuitive response is developed by our willingness to surrender to the divine. Once we've done that, then our response is always one of love. We create the space for love to happen. And I think that when we're looking at the idea of creating space, we're actually looking at an act of love. We're surrendering our action without trying to control the fruits of the action. We're giving that space with no expectation of return. That's a definition here we use for love, which is giving with no expectation of return. So the initial idea of creating space is actually a loving action. And love is not just a personal thing. I always love Eric Fromm, who wrote the book, The Art of Loving. He said, love is not primarily a relationship with a specific person. It is an attitude, an orientation of character, which determines the relatedness of a person to the world as a whole, not towards one object of love. It's an attitude. It is a creation of space. He goes on to say, if a person loves only one other person and is indifferent to the rest of his fellow men, his love is not love, but a symbolic attachment or an enlarged egotism. Yet mostly people believe that love is constituted by the object, not the faculty. And what we're saying in creating space is not about an object, it is about us creating that space. We are getting out of the way and creating a space of love, out of which we're hoping something loving will come. I mean, there's that really famous passage in 1 Corinthians 13. And I always think, when you think about 1 Corinthians 13, this passage, I mean, it doesn't even sound like it comes out of the Bible. It is so practical. Our creed here is what we like to think is we get together to look at how to live life more skillfully. That's our purpose here, to work together to work out how to live life more skillfully. And this really does say it about love. 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. I just think that's such a great description of what it is to create that space. When we surrender to the divine within, we act to create space for others, and this is the character of that space. Now, this may all sound a bit academic, me burbling on about love, but in reality, we all know how to do this. We've all experienced it. When we look at our children, our parents, or a spouse, or someone important to us, we have a natural, intuitive response to love. We just do it, and we feel it. It's not difficult to be patient and kind and all the rest of it when it's our family. The difficulty comes when we're out in the world and it's assailing us in one way or another. Then it's more difficult to create the space for love to happen because we're involved. Whereas we can surrender to the love of our family, not to be too attached to what our children do, it's more difficult in the world when we're often trying to control something and make it go our own way. So how do we create a loving space in those circumstances? Well, the reason that we love our family is because our family is kin. Now, kin's an interesting word. It comes from the Old English spelled C-Y-N-N. And it's of Germanic origin, and the Dutch, K-U-N-N-E, kun. And it actually means, in those old words, to give birth to. That's what kin actually means. And when we give birth to something, then the channel of love is naturally open, and we just include our family within that. The route through here is to see that not only do we give birth to our family, but each of us also, all the time, gives birth to the entire universe. We are intimately connected to the entire universe, both in terms of our atoms being shared by the universe, but also in terms that we in the universe fundamentally come from the same source, the same consciousness. In Christian terms, we might say that we all share a Father in heaven. In Buddhist terms, we might say that we come from the same self. In Taoist terms, we might say that the Tao is there. Hindus express it well in the Upanishads, the Hindu scripture. I always love this quote. This is from the Upanishads. Like two birds of golden plumage, inseparable companions, the individual self and the immortal self are perched on the branches of the same self tree. The former, the individual self, tastes of the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree, the latter tasting of neither, the latter bird just calmly observes. The individual self, deluded by forgetfulness of his identity within the divine self, bewildered by his ego, grieves and is sad. But when he recognizes the worshipful God as his own true self and beholds his glory, he grieves no more. Seeing him present in all, the wise man is humble, puts not himself forward. His delight is in the self. His joy is in the self. He serves the Lord of all. The Lord of all. The idea that we share that Lord of all. By seeing that, as Jesus puts it, when he says, I am in the Father, you are in me, and I am in you. If we can see that, we see that we're actually kin with the entire universe. And, interesting, this is not something easily seen by the mind, but it is more witnessed in the present moment. When we let our thoughts fall away and we see and feel our kinship with all around us, and even though we're all separate here, if we can just be with each other in the present moment, we do feel that connection together, all of us witnessing the life within and the life around us coming from the same source. And it's this realization that allows us to create the space to be all loving and therefore develop that intuitive response, the loving response to all that happens. And when I was thinking about John Denver's lyrics, you can see it in his lyrics. The particular love of kin in Annie's song. You fill up my senses like a night in the forest, like the mountains in springtime, like a walk in the rain, like a storm in the desert, like a sleepy blue ocean. You fill up my senses, come fill me again. There is that mixture of familiar kin there and universal kin. And again, in Rocky Mountain High, now he walks in quiet solitude in the forests and the streams, seeking grace in every step he takes. His sight has turned inside himself to try and understand the serenity of a clear blue mountain lake. Now his life is full of wonder, but his heart still knows some fear of a simple thing he cannot comprehend, while they try to tear the mountain down to bring a couple more people, more scars to the land. His kinship there with the land. And we've just heard in Country Roads, take me home to the place I belong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country roads. The personal and the impersonal nature of the Mountain Mama. And so the act, and it is an act, and I am on the last page, so don't panic. So the act, and it is an act of creating, and that's what we're talking about here, creating a loving space, is something that we do for our family and those around us. But for us to take it one stage further is create that space for all that we come into contact with. And we have the ability to do that because we're connected in a manner of kinship to all around us. When we realize this, we see the creation of a loving space is not something random and arbitrary, something that we do because we ought to, like being nice to the checkout staff. No, it is the correct response to the realization that the whole universe is our wider family. And the only appropriate response to that wider family is one of love, because the kingdom of heaven is within us. Our first act is to surrender to the greater spirit within, that vast space of potential that we all carry. You can call it the Christ or the self. And once we've done that, we've surrendered, we become an instrument of that great spirit, and we bring it forth through our awareness of a deep relationship with all of us, all that's around us in the present moment. Our intimate interconnectedness, our shared consciousness, our kinship for the source of all. And then we develop that intuitive response that allows us to create the space for a loving environment around us, not controlling the outcome of these actions, but holding space for the universe to respond to us within that loving context. When we have that, we have our salvation. We have our place of safety. Because when we live in love, love never fails. This is the first step in creating space for others and for the world around us. It is a decision to offer love, to offer being patient and kind, not envying, and all that other stuff that's in 1 Corinthians 13. That is the starting point for creating space, because it's not controlling, it is giving space. It is then that we're able to use our intuitive response to take the next step based on whatever circumstances we're in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that more next week. We always just like to give anyone an opportunity to come back to us as to either disagree with something that's been said or share an experience, just to move us on in the conversation. Sometimes nobody wants to say anything, that's absolutely fine. But what we'd like to do is just offer out, Camille, that's great, fantastic. Just an opportunity to say something if you want to.
Good morning. Welcome, John Denver Weekers. I met John in 1968 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was married to a top 50 disc jockey, and John was trying to get Country Roads played on the air. We were in a coffee shop. And then John and I wound up living here. And his son Zach went to school with my son Luke. The last time I saw John was on the gondola going up the mountain, and I think he was wrestling with a lot of deep concerns at the time. And then I had a consignment shop, and Annie called me and asked me to sell his furniture. So I wound up selling his furniture. And I know where his desk is in Wyoming, and I'd like the darn thing back. So he had such a deep connection here, and I felt so blessed to know him. And I'm glad you all know him also through his music, which never ends.
Thank you, Camille. That's great. Anybody else want to say anything, make a contribution at all?
Yes, Sam.
Siam. Oh, yes. Good.
Thank you for what you said about creating space. It taught me something today, and I appreciate, everything you said. I wish it were all that simple. So I appreciate what you said then about then going to your intuition based on certain circumstances and kind of knowing what to do. Because there are times with predatory people where just giving space and giving love isn't the whole picture. So thanks for saying that. That helped me to understand. And I look forward to learning more about that.
Yeah, I think it's really important that when you create spaces, not just by saying you can do whatever you like, you have to hold a space that enables that, a loving space that enables whatever healing to come forward. And sometimes, I said this a few weeks ago, it doesn't work necessarily to give if a drug addict says, give me some drugs now, it doesn't work. Yeah. So a loving space is something that you have to really know intuitively how to create. And part of the problem is that we don't know how to do that in different in international terms, we don't know how to give space. So we end up just fighting each other. We have to discover the ability to give space, because I think when you're able to give space, then harmony can come about from that. So thank you for mentioning that. Anybody else? Yes, at the back there. Just say your name. I don't think I know your name.
I'm Chris, and since you mentioned St. Francis, I just learned this week John Denver's song Boy from the Country was actually written for and about St. Francis.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I learn something new every day, and I didn't know that. Anybody else?